All right, let's kick things off. And this session will be recorded, so please be aware of that. And for everybody who joins a little bit later, they'll be able to catch up on the recording. So thank you to those who have joined us so far today. In addition to the recording, what we will be doing is we will have the chat enabled and the mic enabled for questions at the end. So we won't do questions. You can ask questions in the chat as we go along, and as we see them, if we get a chance, we'll respond to them. But at the end, we will have an opportunity for some Q&A. So again, this session is being recorded and we'll be able to catch up on it later. But without further ado, let's get started. So thank you, everybody, for joining this session on learning with an impact in a hybrid workforce. So as we're all aware, the landscape of corporate learning is changing in terms of shifting skill sets, shifting needs. We've obviously got the impact of AI, which raises a lot of eyebrows and asks a lot of questions. So today what we'll be doing is discussing the changing landscape in terms of how our approach to corporate learning is changing, what different tools and technologies are out there can help us, and how we can do this in a hybrid workforce, right? So post-pandemic, people are working both in person and remote, and a blend of the two. Many organizations are shifting to sort of a hybrid approach. So we're going to be taking a look at that in the context of how we rolled out a real world example of hybrid global scalable training at AvePoint. Okay. And we're going to do that by discussing both in terms of what's happening in the corporate landscape today, but also showing you an actual demo, a real demo of what we did to help address that problem. But to set the scene with today's challenges, it'll be myself and Viktor Lindblom who will do an introduction of in a second. But to kick things off, just so you know, we've got two companies at play here. We've got AvePoint and our subsidiary MaivenPoint. Most of you will be familiar with AvePoint, a leading technology company since about 2001, dealing with solutions and services in the Microsoft space. And out of that came MaivenPoint. So we are the e-learning subsidiary of AvePoint, specifically focusing on e-learning solutions, both in education and in corporate learning as well. So we kind of have a multi-pronged approach here where I'll be representing the MaivenPoint side. So I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of MaivenPoint, looking after that globally. And joining me today is from the AvePoint side is Viktor. So Viktor, did you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yep, so my name is Viktor, obviously based in New York. I've been with AvePoint for approximately a year and a half in the L&D space since the late 2000s. And very happy to be with you all today.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, I should have mentioned my Australian accent deceives me, but I'm based in Washington, DC, and the beautiful background behind me is because I'm visiting our Jersey City office today. So you've got a lovely view of my hotel room in the background. So, all right, let's get things started. So look, to set the stage a bit, Viktor, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the changes that we're seeing in the corporate L&D landscape today and some of the challenges that we're facing?
Sure, thanks for that intro, Tim. And again, very nice to be with you all today. To set the stage, actually, as I was thinking about the preparation for today's webinar and sort of what we're talking about here, I was actually going back to my early days in L&D. Like I mentioned, I've been in this space since 2008, and during that time, there's obviously been quite a lot of disruption and change in the industry in general. One of the things that I've seen kind of throughout my career in L&D is that sometimes L&D and training can be treated a little bit as a necessary evil, or perhaps more of a compliance requirement, something that's kind of like something that we have to do versus something that's truly value adding. And with that, sometimes the level of investment and ambition put into L&D programming at large is sometimes somewhat low as a result. But I really think that's a missed opportunity, and actually this is a very exciting and interesting time to be in this space. L&D can, and I would argue should be, leveraged as a deliberate tool and resource that really sets people up for success and allows them to apply key concepts that relate directly to job performance and business outcomes, with real-time coaching and feedback integrated into that journey with the help of modern technology, of course, so that as an organization, we're effectively enabling people to do what the organization needs them to do, while also measuring and validating their ability to do just that, so that we can, in an intelligent and sort of more business relevant way, showcase success with actual metrics and data behind our programming, capturing both what works and potentially some of the areas that need more attention over time. With that, I think it's kind of high time to start thinking about training really as a value add and not something that's kind of a checkbox or something that we need to get through. And with that, we also need to, I think, rethink our methodology a little bit. From my standpoint, it's really about guiding people through relevant learning paths and giving them specific follow-up actions and activities that relate to the business metrics, and challenging our learners to put their knowledge into practice in a way that allows us to enable sort of measurement of the activities, the results related to the activities, and showcasing through that the difference that our programming results in. So it's a bit of a switch from kind of measuring the traditional metrics, learning retention and things along those lines, kind of net promoter scores and so on, to actually looking more at what are the activities and the results associated with the activities that we are generating through our L&D programming. That obviously at scale introduces a couple of challenges, I think particularly because in a large scale enterprise type of environment, such as AvePoint, for instance, a lot of these initiatives need to be deployed globally, but they also need to accommodate regional variances, and usually all of that needs to be accomplished with fairly minimal supporting resource allocation. So one of the things that we've done here at AvePoint, and Tim will talk you through some of the examples here, is we've actually implemented a global L&D framework that's been customized to account for regional needs. That mixes occasional live and recorded instructor-led sessions together with on-demand content, and tweaked and tailored, of course, as needed, but globally sort of like fitting within set parameters, so that we have an always on-demand learning path in place. And that's really allowed us to maximize our L&D reach without having to run a high-touch program that needs lots of scheduling or admin support. And we've been really able to supercharge the ROI from our L&D investments through rethinking not just sort of the structure of the programming and how we're constructing those programs, but also actually how we deliver those programs at scale, which I think is an important point. I think the big learning point here is really that through developing and delivering globally consistent but locally relevant training with a really strong outcome focus, we've been able to make significant strides across key productivity metrics and quantify the results of that programming with actual KPIs that relate directly to productivity metrics across onboarding and sales and management, just to mention a few. So I think the challenge here is really to start thinking about L&D as something that drives business performance versus, something kind of out of a box that needs to be ticked, and something that's kind of more retroactive and remedial, if that makes sense. Tim, with that, maybe we can go to the next slide unless you have something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to add on that because we have a little bit on the right there talking about the shift in skill sets, and I think just to make sure we're all baseline, because I know a lot in the L&D are aware of this already in the community, but obviously the way technology is changing, especially with AI in the mix, we definitely see that. This is a study performed by Microsoft and LinkedIn Learning together, but we've seen that in the last few years, there's been a significant change in the skills needed to be effective in your role. And that's exactly what you're coming back to in terms of, the ROI and the metrics and the what are we investing into. And the reason we need to do that is because to keep people effective in their role, looking ahead, we can see that there's a significant change coming, right? There's a significant change in the skills needed in what you need to be effective in your role, which needs to be addressed. And so for companies to stay competitive and for organizations to keep meeting those metrics and that ROI and their investment, I mean, the reason we're doing this is to make sure it's not just checking a box, like you said, right? It's making sure that our workforce and our employees are actually empowered to continue being successful in their role.
Yeah. That's actually a great segue.
Yep, I'm just clicking the mouse. Okay, there we go.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Tim. So on that note, actually, and sort of to some of the points that Tim was speaking about there, I think there's a couple of maybe common misconceptions in the field that we should probably debunk here for a moment before doing anything else. In basically adopting that kind of outcome-based approach that I was talking about there, I think the key is really to reevaluate how we think about not just our current content and programming, but kind of like generally where L&D fits in and what we're trying to do with it. So a really common misconception in this field, for instance, is that knowledge increase and knowledge retention automatically somehow leads to application by default. And so the goal is sort of somehow mysteriously to increase knowledge itself, and that's what we're measuring. But I think we can actually take that a little bit further by building in the metrics around the application and really honing in on the desired business goal, and then constructing the initiative in a way that measures the skill application and doing something with the learning rather than the learning retention only, because it's in the doing and in applying the learning where we've seen results. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. Now, all of this obviously relies on having a really clear call to action defined for each training initiative that we're measuring, both before and after our L&D engagements, so that we can measure and socialize actual business results as the outcome versus, again, knowledge retention only as the only outcome. For the record, by the way, I'm not saying that knowledge retention is a bad thing, obviously, but what I am saying is that I think we can make training generally more targeted, generally more outcome-based, and generally more applicable by building in the application of what's been learned into what we're measuring as a great way to really quantify success in this space. And that helps substantially with proving the ROI, which I know is a hot topic always for anyone in an L&D leadership role. So what are we saying then? I think what we're saying here is that an effective learning initiative should really be measurable from a business standpoint. And with that, we need to be really clear about the outcomes we're looking for and driving towards a very specific predetermined call to action. And by being really clear on those basics before we start doing anything at all, I think we're always off to a good start, because it'll help you define your approach and your supporting program metrics around what the business needs, so that you can, again, have a good story to tell at the end of your journey. That's a little bit about the kind of programming, the approach, and thinking through how to sort of orientate yourself around what you're looking to do from a methodology standpoint. But Tim, I'm going to take a pause there, I think, and hand it back over to you so you can talk a little bit more about sort of the experience and what powers all of this in more detail.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously having a solid foundation and a solid methodology is important, but for a lot of the skills and the interactivity needed, some of the challenges that I hear, or that we hear, I should say, in the field about this is that when people think of an online learning experience, a lot of it is very self-paced, self-directed, self-discovered. It's a very individual kind of activity as a base assumption in terms of, hey, I'm going to log on to this system and look at this video. Whereas we know, obviously, training takes on a lot of different kinds of forms. There's, like you said, there's blended live, there's in person, there's live in person, there's on demand, there's supplementary material, and a big factor of that is peer learning as well, and collaborative learning, right? To make a really engaging, sticky learning experience, you don't want to just be sitting in a classroom having knowledge retention. You really want to be able to put these skills to practice in the field. You want to be learning off your other peers, off other, your L&D professionals, and really having the chance for collaborative peer learning. And that's something that's lacking in a lot of modern learning systems today. So, when we talk about the ultimate collaborative learning experience, what is the utopia vision where we kind of want to get to? We want to be in a space where we can, have a seamless experience, right? For a lot of organizations, it's not a one-size-fits-all tool when it comes to learning. You're going to have some people components, and you're going to have multiple system components where you have some on-demand libraries from third-party providers, as well as in-house content, as well as institutional content. So there's a lot of areas where you can take on learning, and you want that to be seamless, right? So for a lot of customers we speak to, it's very disjointed. They may not have single sign-on. They may have different pockets of repositories of knowledge to go to. So what is a way we can actually bring that together into a single hub where you're not having to log into external software, you're not having to go searching all around the place, where it's really at your fingertips, right? So that's one of the things. Another aspect of on what a utopia vision could look like is being able to have that real-time peer learning that you get from an in-person experience. So like we used to do onboarding at AvePoint back in the day, where everyone would fly in and come to one office and sit down together. It's not just about the knowledge that's being imparted from someone like yourself, Viktor. It's also about making those connections with your fellow peers, right? The fellow people in the room, having those discussions, having those chats. And in a hybrid workplace where now people are remote, people are not necessarily all in the same room. Some people might be in the room, some people might be dialing in. How can we really facilitate that sort of interactivity and peer collaboration in much the same way? Similarly, when it comes to consuming the content and the documentation, how can we make it seamless or an easy experience rather than having a meeting over here on Zoom or in a classroom and then going somewhere else to pick up the documents? being able to blend those two experiences together is an important part of that collaborative learning experience, and this really comes down to cutting down, if we want to talk about the ROI you mentioned before, it's really talking about both cutting down operational efficiencies, how do we make this easy and seamless to manage and not an administrative burden for Viktor and his team to be able to do this, but also from the user experience side as well, right? We want to make it as easy as possible to access and interact and be engaged with the program for the best outcomes. And the more roadblocks you put in the way, the more difficult it becomes.
Can I add something there, Tim?
Absolutely.
So there's two other sort of general considerations that I feel like are maybe worth mentioning here. One is that obviously attention spans these days are incredibly short. And so I don't think you have that many opportunities actually from a learning standpoint to direct somebody to a platform and rely on their ability to click around or search or log in or do, any number of things to find relevant learning. And so I think that's always been a little bit of a challenge in this space, frankly, but it's never been more of a challenge because just social media and it's so much sprawl and so much stuff competing for my attention at any given one time. I mean, people just don't have the sort of click tolerance that they once had to go in and click around and search. So I think that's like one thing that's important to note. It's incredibly important to bring the learning and the platform and the experience to where people are at. And with that brings us kind of to the second point. So often in this space, you have like your actual work applications where you do your work, and then you might be using Slack or Teams or Zoom or something else where you're meeting, and then you have your LXP or your LMS again, like in some other place somewhere. And this flipping between applications, flipping between experiences, and again, sort of like having to do this cold start every time from every new application and every new environment that you're in, that's all a distraction, actually. And it becomes quite a large distraction in, a large-scale enterprise environment where, every time Viktor uses 2 minutes to click around and search for something, and there's, maybe a couple of thousands of Viktors, well, you can do the math. It's a lot of productivity loss just because of actual simple basics that aren't necessarily quite as tight as we'd like them to be. So I think those are all worthwhile bearing in mind. Sometimes that sort of like broader business ROI and the driving efficiency through those types of initiatives gets a little bit lost in the shuffle and lost in the mix. But again, I feel those are important points to remember as you go into doing your work in this space, whatever tools you might be using.
Awesome. So that brings us to a real world example of how we tie this together, right? So, and Viktor will definitely add a bit more color on this, but one of the challenges that AvePoint had was looking at implementing how do we create a global leadership manager training program. I should have used the word leadership training instead of manager training. That'll be a more accurate description of what you guys set out to do. But how do we create a program for upskilling and training our managers globally, but taking into account local, contextual, regional differences, and how can we do this at scale, right? So, and I think you had a number of initiatives, Viktor, in terms of both goals for the live training as well as supplementary materials in terms of on-demand follow-up action items and some of that skills validation. So what were some of the challenges that you experienced with that in terms of scaling that out globally?
I think first of all, getting the model right to begin with was something that we had to do quite a lot of thinking about, because it's our team is rather small. I'm sure this is a shared challenge, and again, many people have, had the same resource and headcount constraints that I have, I'm sure. So getting the model right and building something that scales to the world but doesn't require lots of high-touch admin support is obviously critical. I think generally the organizational appetite to be building programs that require lots of dedicated training time, classroom time, take people again away from where they're at, and so on, that tolerance isn't really there anymore. And so I think what organizations are looking for these days is really direct results and application from anything that we spend time and effort on. AvePoint has been, I think, very diligent and somewhat demanding, actually, in us honing in on those productivity metrics and launching something that scales across the world with, again, regional programming and activation, so that we can in fact rely on us scaling our management and leadership basics out to the world with a consistent experience, protecting the integrity of what we're building for a global audience. But again, from a regional standpoint, making sure that where there are local variances, and those could sometimes be as large as, hey, we have an office in Japan and we need those people to go through the same program, only it needs to be all tailored to, obviously, and customized to a Japanese audience, including localization.
Right.
We've had to do quite a lot of thinking around that. So I feel like with this approach, actually, with kind of like a globally standardized management code, core programming training around that, and being able to scale and deploy that globally to an audience consisting of various different folks at varying degrees of seniority, but again, having kind of like a shared global shell that we can activate and then customize based on local compliance requirements and so on, with regional build outs of what the sort of deployment of that training looks like for each market. That's been really, really powerful for us. And again, as an outcome, I mean, we're able to run this now effectively off the shelf with the activation happening on the learner side rather than somebody from my team needing to, in every single instance, go and do a bunch of hand-holding and support. So that's been really great.
Fantastic. And I think with that, that's probably a good segue to launch into the demo aspect of this. Yeah. So again, you know, like you were trying to achieve there. So how do we take this core program of training for leadership and managers throughout AvePoint and you know, scale that to all of the managers and leadership teams across North America and EMEA and APAC, recognizing different time zones, different local constraints, and things such as local trainers, right? Local language trainers or local presence. So let me talk you through how we did that using the MaivenPoint software, such as Curricula, which is part of the MaivenPoint platform. So first of all, I'll just talk to you a little bit about Curricula. So I will Alt-Tab over to that screen. Great. So let me show you Curricula here just a minute. So everyone can see my screen there that's coming up. Loading this over the hotel Wi-Fi.
Yep.
So great, fantastic. So what you can see at the moment, so this is essentially our LMS, and it's our interactive LMS that's part of the MaivenPoint platform. And Curricula, as you can see from the homepage here, very easy. What you see is what you get kind of set up. You can configure program buckets, courses, manage user roles, very easy interactive. So I'm showing you the admin view at the moment, and we'll talk about how we use this to set up a program. And what you're seeing here is we have a mix of courses available on the homepage, both third-party and in-house. So we just like every other LMS, LXP out in the market, we do have third-party content connections for things like Go1 and LinkedIn Learning if you want to bring in external learning resources, but you can also create your own learning resources internally, okay? And what we've done here, so I'll show you our leadership training series. So I'll just look for it, leadership training. So this is a demo of our leadership training series where I'm able to come in and configure our course. So this is essentially the leadership training that we have at AvePoint. So let me talk you through how this works. So I'll swap back to the slides momentarily. Okay. So what we're able to do at AvePoint, so recognizing our goal, right? We want to set up a single program of work. So in curricular terms, that's a course. A course is your collection of lesson planning, which live sessions you're going to do from meeting invites and in-person hybrid, as well as your on-demand content together. So your course is a collection of your lesson plan and your different audiences. These are your different class or cohorts of learners. So you can see here, this is our Take Point Manager training, and we have 3 different classes there. We have our APAC, EMEA, and North America. So by creating the course, this is what defines your lesson plan and all of your activities. So it's all self-contained as that single central core, and then you're able to split that out into multiple different areas. So this is a great way to scale out the training. So every class that we create becomes its own dedicated team in Microsoft Teams. So we'll show you a little bit more about that in a second, but what this enables is a dedicated space for both hosting meetings, but also for peer collaboration and learning, while also bringing learning content directly into the learner's hands in Microsoft Teams, where they're working every day without having to leave. So you'll see a bit more of that. But the other thing you can see here is that not only does the APAC managers, the EMEA managers, and the North America managers get their own team and their own place to share best practices and the like, but each class also has their own local owner for that region. So this is where you can actually assign local trainers to either certain sessions or to certain cohorts to be able to have that central L&D control in terms of what the overall program looks like, but also give the flexibility and the ability out to local trainers as well. Okay. So from there, what we're able to do is set up the lesson plan. So in the case of TakePoint, part of the goal of this program or the leadership training program we had at AvePoint was to allow different guest speakers to be able to come in and share different management perspectives in terms of setting expectations and coaching. And a great part here is once you create the overall lesson plan about what the program of training needs to look like, you then actually tailor that to each region. So for every class of cohorts that you've created for, like you can see here, APAC, EMEA, and North America, you can see we can set different dates and times for the lesson plan. And one thing we didn't enable in this screenshot is if you select enable meeting invitation, the automatic meeting series invites will go out, and you'll see that again in a second. And that comes on behalf of the trainer you've assigned. So if Viktor is assigned as the trainer, we set up the lesson plan. Once we publish this course, the dates and times for these meetings will automatically go out on Viktor's behalf. So again, we're trying to reduce that operational burden, trying to reduce the high touch and be able to make it easier to create and scale a course to manage the training. From there, we're able to then add our blended learning content. So for every lesson that we have, we're going to have an in-person session where someone comes in and does some training, does some coaching, but then there's also some playbooks for follow-ups, whether it's an interactive kind of playbook to follow some tasks or follow a SCORM package, as well as things like check out corporate policy, perform a quiz, upload some information for other managers to validate. So that's where you're able to build it. And again, when you're doing this in curricula, it's what you see is what you get kind of experience. So it steps you through one by one. Set up your classes, whether APAC, EMEA, North America, configure your lesson plan and then assign times, as well as if you're going to enable a meeting invitation, configure your learning path content. Again, this is drag and drop. So I can, for every lesson that I create, and I can publish this at different times. So you can do stuff like make the learning content available 5 days before the lesson happens, before the training session, as well as then configuring your additional settings about whether you want to have self-enrollment, manual enrollment, and whether you want automatic grading and marking. So as we mentioned, the end result of this is that when you publish this, we then have every cohort gets their own team with their own personalized lesson plan, and they're able to access they're not only able to have interaction, so they can actually post questions, answer questions, share best practices and interact with each other, but they can also access the learning material and the learning activities directly from teams. So let's take a look at what that looks like from a learner experience. So what we'll do now is show you a little bit about what that looks like. So as a learner, one of the things I'm able to do, so curricula can operate like a traditional LMS, right? I can open it in the browser, be able to access my courses. I can see my leadership training series. I can click view my learning activities, and I can access the content. This is very similar to traditional LMSs that happen in the browser, where I can work through my lesson plan, setting expectations, coaching, and performance management. What we do differently is, like we said, as a learner, every course that I'm enrolled in comes with a team. So this is where I'm able to see, for example, within teams, I can now see I've been joined to a team with my interactions here, being able to post to it, and I've got my different, every time a new lesson opens, it will open one of the session channels automatically. So again, to be able to scale this out traditionally, someone in Viktor's team would have to go and create a team, create a channel, manually upload the content, manually enroll the learners, being able to create this just to enable this sort of hybrid learning experience. And this is something that happens automatically. Okay. But what I want to show you now is another way that you can engage with this content, which is via Viva Learning. So Viva Learning is, of course, Microsoft's answer to the LXP. So being able to bring multiple learning sources, whether SharePoint, LinkedIn Learning, and other content into Teams. So similarly, if you haven't manually enrolled your managers into these groups, which, by the way, you can do as either individuals, or we also support AD groups. So if you've got an AD group already of your learners ready to go, you can dynamically add that group to any enrollment or any course. Again, simplifying the overhead, simplifying adding and removing people from courses by being able to use Azure AD dynamic groups. Okay. So let's have a look at this. So in Viva Learning, for example, if one of our managers or one of our people is looking for self-directed learning, they can click on Viva Learning in Microsoft Teams, where they get access to all the different learning material in their environment. They're then able to browse through Viva Learning and find something like the leadership training series or the any other sort of training that's on offer, whether it's on demand or blended. In this case, it's a blended course with the leadership training series. And after clicking on that, looking at it and finding it, they're able to say, I want to enroll in this course. And when they click on the link in Viva Learning, it will launch a browser window where they can find more information. You can see here browsing the different cohorts and timing that are available. And when you join and you're able to join the class, the first thing that will happen is you'll get the meeting invite series, like we mentioned. So you'll be able to get all the different lesson plans as they come through, and as new lessons are published, you'll receive them automatically. Again, a great way to scale out. But similarly, you'll also get a notification about being added to that team. Okay, so this is where, again, coming back to this view here. So what I'm able to do here is say, start interacting with the team, say, hey, this was a great session. I'd love to know more. And then what we're able to do now is we're taking learning out of just the browser, out of Viva Learning, and we're bringing it right into the team where people are getting notifications and being able to interact. Similarly, if I come up here and click on learning activities, so the same learning activities I was showing you before, all the different supplementary material that's associated with each lesson, I don't have to go out to another system to find it. I'm able to access it directly right here from Teams. So what you're seeing here is all of the different learning activities that are published and associated with this learning path are now being tracked. They're able to be reported by Viktor and his team. We can see assessments, we can see how people are progressing, we can see the time they've spent on individual tasks. But as a learner experience, I never have to leave this to go into the other LMS. I never have to go into another system. I'm able to actually access it all from here. So I can have a look at my playbook here that's been generated. I can access that in real time. And one of the great things is that while I'm interacting with this content, so I've got some content in here that I'm able to see how long I've been spending working on it. I'm loading it up. So content is loading, so I can see my application exercises here, my strengths and opportunities. I can take a LinkedIn learning course, complete the self-assessment, and work through these interactive activities. A great part is while I'm working on this content or while I'm interacting with this content, I can actually then chat in real time, right? So this is a native feature of Teams. So while I'm accessing the learning content, it's now gone beyond just a self-directed, self-paced activity, and now it's becoming an actual peer learning activity. So I can say, I have a question in this task. And as I'm working on that, that will appear in the channel. So my peers will see it, my other colleagues will see it, but also the L&D team, the trainers and other HR, anybody who's associated with this course will be able to see that. So this is where our learning directors can come in and actually help course correct or answer questions, or we can enable our subject matter experts in the team to be able to answer those questions as well. So this is a really great example of being able to access media content, whether it's videos, whether it's interactive SCORM learning libraries or other kinds of content, and I can chat and interact with it in real time. Similarly, from a blended learning experience, one of the other great parts is that because this team is dedicated to this cohort, and again, all automatic behind the scenes. So as people are enrolled or unenrolled in the course, whether automatically or manually, they'll automatically be added or removed from this team too. But that means for the L&D team, they know that this team is bound to this cohort. So if we're going to schedule an ad hoc meeting, outside of the lesson plan, maybe it's an ad hoc meeting, we can now have that hybrid collaborative learning experience that you'd normally do in the workplace, but we can apply this to an L&D scenario as well. And one of the questions we often get is then, isn't this noisy for the L&D team, or isn't this noisy for HR or the trainers who are on the line? And again, native features being able to help with that. This is where you can mute the channel or mute the team or change your notification settings. And that way you have full control both as a learner and as a trainer in terms of how and who you're interacting with. Did you have anything you want to add on top of that, Viktor, before I keep going?
Maybe just one thing. Actually, I was thinking about what's maybe another example that might resonate with our audience here today. So, but I'm making assumptions that many of you on the call are either hosting or thinking about hosting a globally consistent onboarding experience and program for any new hires within your organization, that's another great example actually of a program where we've seen really great success through the tools and the resources that Tim is sharing here. Because again, there too, we need to ensure as an organization at AvePoint that as we grow and scale and hire more people, which by the way, we are doing all the time, we need to protect the integrity of our global onboarding experience and get everyone situated and orientated into their new role with some degree of global consistency around, our values and who we are as a company and what we stand for and what the business is about and all the rest of it. So those are sort of the elements that are globally standardized and globally applicable across the board. But because we do have global offices in lots of different markets and lots of different territories, each of those actually have highly variable requirements from a compliance standpoint as to like what type of paperwork do you need, for instance, your new hire to sign off on the legal policies and procedures that are in place for that market and that market alone. So as you kind of look through this and look through some of these channels that Tim is talking about, it's maybe worthwhile to also think about maybe some of these classes and the paths as, hey, maybe this could be kind of like an element of my program that I actually need to share across multiple different theaters or potentially even across the entire globe. But actually, within that global framework, there might be elements from, say, a policy or paperwork standpoint that we need to automate. And we need to do that, again, without introducing another HR person to sort of manually administer that programming. So I think there's so many use cases here and things that we could talk about. But again, throwing that out there more as a thought-provoking talking point than anything else.
No, that's actually a great example, Victor. I mean, you're talking about scaling out or keeping a core and then being able to repeat that. It's not just about scaling globally. It's also about, like you said, repeatability in terms of like what we do with our onboarding. So every batch or cohort of new hires that we get for the new hire onboarding, traditionally in an in-person model, they'd come in person and meet their fellow new hires, but in a remote hybrid model, that may not be the case. And being able to do this, so we've both got the consistent programming from the core program that has the outlined lesson plan, has the outlined activities that they need to complete, but giving them that space to interact in a hybrid space as well, that has those advantages.
Yeah. And depending a little bit on how you're set up, by the way, you may be able to actually automate like all of the kind of behind the scenes stuff too. So in this model here that if we're sort of, well, we're looking at something on the screen now that's more onboarding specific. So what we're actually doing from the only thing that we need to do manually is basically add people to a class that already exists. That's it. The program runs itself from there on. And that's actually been a huge time and cost saver on our end, because again, we also back in the day used to have a much more kind of old school approach here where we had dedicated resources, hosting and facilitating these new hire classes on a weekly basis. That may or may not be, by the way, something that some of you on the call today do. If you do, I don't want to say again that that's a bad thing. There's definite advantages to that too. But I think looking at this more as kind of like, there probably are some options to scale some elements of what we're doing so that we can actually spend more time on the things that really add value from kind of an in-person interaction standpoint. I think that's maybe a more, a better way to look at this, because again, I don't want to sound like I'm saying that, we should scale and automate everything. I don't think our AI overlords are quite there yet. But there are definitely opportunities to scale and automate at least some of it so that you can spend more of your time where it really counts.
Excellent. Cool. So just to sort of wrap up a few of these concepts, and then so what we'll do is I know we've got about 20 minutes left, so we'll spend the next 10 minutes just sort of doing a quick recap, and then we'll go into the Q&A because I can see there's some questions coming in the chat. But again, just to wrap up, so what we're able to do is take a function, take a course, and be able to build out a lesson plan or a plan of attack or a plan of work in terms of tasks that the learner has to go through to meet a specific outcome, right? There's specific goals, there's specific things we want to get to, but we also want to be able to both provide a platform for interactivity, for local live presentation and hybrid learning, as well as that locally relevant flavor. How do we take the core program and make it locally consistent? A lot of that comes from the local content, local interactions, and the local flavor and timeline. So that's some of ways that we achieve that using curricula, with a standard central course, and then being able to split that out across the multiple cohorts or multiple sort of initiatives with that core program. So, so what are some of the takeaways we've got from here? I mean, Victor, we're talking about, L&D is obviously a powerful tool to set people up for its success, but there's a lot of considerations for its effectiveness.
Yeah, I feel like I've mentioned some of these points already, but maybe to recap some of the highlights. One of the things that I think is worthwhile considering is how can we use L&D as a tool and a resource to again scale and automate some of the other work and sort of the administration that goes into running some of these programs. That's a really important point that sometimes we don't spend enough time thinking through. But the effectiveness of our programming generally really relies on us being super clear about what's the outcome, the intended sort of utopian business vision of what we're working towards, and how can we put measurable against that with activity leading up to it, so that we're actually putting training into place that allows people to learn, practice what they've learned in a safe space, and through that generate results that we can then measure and report on. And that's been a really great sort of proof point for my team, if you will. What I'm really saying there is that I think we should start paying more attention to measuring the business outcome attainment, and probably not entirely forego, but switch our focus to, not only look at learning retention and NPS scores and those kind of more traditional L&D metrics, if you will. But again, all of this is contextual, obviously highly variable to your situation, your organization, your culture, and many other things too. So I think, again, through some of the tools, the resources, the technology, but also in maybe evaluating our approach, there's a lot of opportunity out there to do what we're already doing well, but do it potentially even better, and then take away some of those things that need our attention sort of in a time-consuming, high-touch way, and maybe look for opportunities to scale those more so that we can, again, use more of our time more effectively where it really counts. I think that's my main message today. With that, Tim, you look a little pixelated. I hope you can still hear us. Maybe we can. Yeah, maybe we can move over to Q&A unless you have something else to cover.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great segue to get over to Q&A. So first of all, thank you to everybody for joining today and listening along. And what we'll probably do is start with the ones in the chat, and then we'll take it from there. And I'll just leave a placeholder slide up in the meantime. So take a look at the chat here. I can see Claire has a question about, looks great. Are you looking at integrations beyond Microsoft by any chance? Yes, the answer is yes. So a couple of great quick answers for you on that. So in addition to Microsoft, we also have, which of course is Teams, SharePoint, People Learning, and all the great Microsoft goodness, because we are a Microsoft company at heart. Some of the other areas we integrate with, we have native integration for Zoom, by the way. So if you want to do Zoom meetings and Zoom collaboration, that's one of the native plugins that we have that we do support. We also have a public API and a couple of other different ways to integrate upon that. So I see you mentioned WorkJam there. It's not something I'm super familiar with out of the box, but we do have public APIs available. We do have different ways of integrating. One of the things that we've done that's very creative with our customers as well is because we do integrate with SharePoint for things like writing course results too, you can set up Power Automate and other kinds of low code, no code integrations as well, in addition to what we do from a native platform. So that's one way to do it. But yes, we are looking into other integrations. If there's a case for WorkJam, happy to see what else we can do there. So yes, the short answer is yes. Long answer is there's a lot of different platforms and interactions out there, so we need to take a look at it and see exactly what it is. I see the next question here from Jenna about, does the system handle archiving channels based on a specific date, so there is no long list of channels? The quick answer to that is, so we do support showing and hiding and accessing and not accessing content in the learning path specifically. So when you've got the channel there, you've got an ongoing discussion. However, and there's a lot of fruitful stuff to be learned from that discussion, especially for people who join the course later. Maybe they've missed a couple of sessions. They can catch up on that discussion in the channel. So that's typically the value behind leaving the discussion in the channel. However, when we click on learning activities and have a look at the content in the learning path, that can be gated in terms of showing and hiding and certain trigger points. archive the channels. So one question we do get is about the team itself. So if someone from the L&D team probably has a lot of different cohorts that they're across, probably a lot of different team in their teams. So we mentioned about muting them. You can hide the team as well. And if you are at a point in your course where you don't need the team anymore, you maybe don't need that collaborative aspect anymore, you can just manually switch off the team from curricula or just manually delete the team in Teams. And you can keep all the learning content in curricula, keep it available in curricula, but you don't necessarily need that team anymore. And generally, when it comes to housekeeping of teams, obviously AvePoint has a lot of solutions around archiving and cleaning up teams as well, so separate to curricula. But yes, we primarily we like to leave the channel there for the discussion and for the interactivity, but you can gate the learning path content. So that's great. Hopefully that answers that question. Was there anybody else? Was there any other questions based on what we're seeing today? Thoughts applicable to you or any other considerations for the system? Yep, we also have the mic enabled, just as a reminder. So if you do want to come off mute and say hi to the group, we're more than happy for it.
Thanks, Tim and Victor. Been a really good presentation. So yeah, thank you for answering the questions as well.
Pleasure.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Jenna. Thank you.
All right. Going once.
Going
twice.
Sold.
And sold, I think.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, in that case, let's I can give you back 10 minutes in your day. I again appreciate everybody who joined today. Thank you for staying tuned at this time, and thanks for all the great questions and interactivity. And yeah, so we're MaivenPoint, specializing in e-learning solutions on top of Microsoft and the AvePoint stack. And yeah, absolutely, happy to have the chance to chat with you today. And if you've got any further questions or you're like an additional follow-up, more than happy, reach out to us at any time, and we'll have a chat with you. So
yeah, that's good.
Cool. And thank you, Victor, for your time today and sharing your insights as an L&D expert in the field.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.